joining us today on Coastal and Progressive Rainbow Forum on Society Bites Radio. I'm Steve Ryan, your host. Today we will be speaking with Bridget Mendel, who is a candidate for the Manatee County School Board. Bridget, how are you doing today?
I'm wonderful. Thank you for having me.
Great to have you. Why don't we start out with you telling a little bit about your background and how you became a candidate for the school board. And you know, we all know we have a lot of improvement to do with our school system here in different ways. And I understand that you have some ideas to do that.
I sure do. I have an undergrad degree in economics, but had always wanted to be a teacher. I went to college in New Hampshire, University of New Hampshire, and my mom had been a longtime educator and really had steered me away from education, to be honest with you. I'm like third generation educator at this point. And so I decided when I was finished that I would go back to graduate school. So I went back to the same graduate school my mother attended, and she was there for undergrad as well in upstate New York at the College of St. Rose, an amazing teacher preparation program, and spent my own money and got my master's in education. I then proceeded to become a permanent sub in a couple of different schools in upstate New York where I was initially certified, and then met my husband and got married and moved to Chicago. And there I proceeded to teach in the city of Chicago for a total of 4 years. I taught on the south and the west sides of Chicago, all Title I schools in some pretty tough neighborhoods, and realized how much I absolutely love teaching. After that, I moved on to Evanston, Illinois, the home of Northwestern University. My school was right down the street, so I had an amazing mix of students whose parents were professors, who were also living in some of the housing projects in Evanston. And so it was an amazingly diverse community. And again, I loved it. Had my children, stayed home for a while, moved to Florida, recertified myself here in Florida, and taught in Manatee County for 2 years. I was at Pshaw Elementary. I was a permanent sub for kindergarten, and then was hired as a full-time educator at Pshaw in first grade. So that's my background in education. I'm a trained reading recovery teacher. I'm also been trained at Orton Gillingham, which is a special program for children who have dyslexia. So I've worked with a broad range of students. My area of expertise, quite honestly, is literacy, early intervention, and primary grade literacy.
Excellent. I understand. Okay, I'm going to ask you some different questions here a little bit and pull out some information. You know, as most of us know, and I'm sure most people in this area listening to it, Manatee County and Sarasota, the school boards have been through some rough times in the last few years over various issues. And one of the things I wanted to ask about was the situation with the federal civil rights lawsuit filed by employees from Lincoln Memorial Academy. Can you make any comments on that, what your positions are, and what you think could be done to resolve the situation? Or
Sure. Sure. And actually, I realized I forgot to answer part of the first question, and that was what brought me to decide to run for school board.
Oh, yes. You're right.
Yes. Yeah. And it's funny because the LMA issue was also one of the reasons why I decided to run. I had been a teacher in Manatee County, and it was right about the time that the replacement for the FCAT was being phased in. That was called the FSA, the Florida Standards Assessment. And I realized that this particular assessment was going to be used to depress teacher wages and teacher pay, and to undermine public education, and in an effort to privatize it. It's been kind of the tool of the privatizers, so to say, to justify privatization and profiteering of public ed in the state of Florida. So I thought about it, and I knew the law was pretty clear. I'd done a lot of research on opting out of the FSA, and the state government made it very clear. If you tell any child in your classroom to refuse to take the FSA or to opt out or to not answer any questions or to undermine it in any way, you could be fired. And I said, okay, well, I'm teaching first grade. They don't take the FSA, so I don't have that as my concern. But I did have a concern because I had my own children who were all in the system. I had twin middle schoolers at the time, and I had a high schooler. And I thought, if you're going to tie this to any teacher's pay, and the only way my teacher would be able to get a raise and to keep her job, or his or her job, was for my child not only to pass it, but to make growth and improvement on what they had done the year before. And if they did not do that, then that would have a negative effect on my child's teachers. I just couldn't. I wouldn't want anybody to do it to me, and I certainly didn't want to harm any of their teachers. I had two of my children who had done extremely well. One had a perfect score in a section, and they were in the 99th percentile. And so I checked, and I said, well, what do you do with a child who had 100% all perfect answers on it? And the state came back and said, your child would have to get another perfect score so as not to hurt their teacher. And I went, oh, this is not right. So did my research, and I decided I was going to opt out my own children from the FSA. And I did it very openly, and that eventually cost me my job. So I realized that maybe I needed to take a break from teaching for a while, and I didn't attempt to go back and look for anything else, and left the teaching field. So as these years have gone on, and I've watched how many schools are being pushed into privatization, and I've watched my friends lose their job over a test score, I decided to become an activist and an advocate, which is what I've done over the last 6 years. I run a group called Opt Out Manatee, and we help and encourage parents to refuse the FSA in a way that it does not hurt their teachers. And so if a child sits down at the test, doesn't answer a single question, and submits a blank test, but shows up to participate, which is all the legislature had asked, that's all they require of students is to participate. We are able to have a neutral effect. No harm will come to that teacher's score that they use to determine a pay increase or even a decrease or a possible loss of a job. So as the years went on, I saw the system continue to struggle and to battle against privatization and profiteering. I saw a great deal of ed tech that was being purchased by the district at great expense that was not improving test scores, that was hurting our students and was not appropriate, especially for many of our ESE or our special education students. So that's what brought me to it. The final straw for me, though, why I ran, was when Cynthia Saunders, our superintendent, had been accused of artificially inflating our school graduation rates. I saw what it had done to many of our most vulnerable students in our community, many of our Title I students, our children who have English as a second language. And it was pretty upsetting. I also did do additional research on my own. I received the investigative reports that were done by the state, and I read them for myself. It was about a 200-page document, and I did find that the investigators did find that she did indeed do this. There was a hearing that would have, it was to determine whether or not she would keep her license and whether or not she would be able to stay as superintendent in our county. And I hopped on a bus with a group of families from Lincoln Memorial Academy, who at the time were also embroiled in their own issues as to the closing of their charter school. And we went to the hearing in Fort Lauderdale. And at the hearing, the commission said said that Cynthia Saunders should not be a superintendent. They were very disturbed that Manatee the school board had promoted her, and they felt that the fine needed to be increased. So they went back to negotiate a second settlement, and the board is allowing Ms. Saunders to keep her job. So at that point in time, I met a great deal of many activists from Lincoln Memorial Academy, heard their story and what happened with them, and that's how I decided, actually it was on that bus ride home from Fort Lauderdale that I decided that I was going to run, because I felt like it was time for me to use my experience, my expertise, and my voice to make a difference for our most vulnerable students in Manatee County.
Okay, that is an incredible story there, and very, very interesting to learn how you came into the picture here. And I want to go back to the privatization thing here and talk about that a little bit, because that's one of my favorite peeves too. And I want to give you an example of you're exactly right. Profiteering on the backs of less fortunate children and things like this is not a good thing at all. And one of my favorite peeves here is where they go and they spent, I mean, you may be aware of the figure, I want to tell you if you're not here. They took over $1 million, this is all well documented, of Florida taxpayers' money to print school books that showed, and they used these in the so-called charter schools and so forth. They used these in showing children riding on the backs of dinosaurs. Can you think of anything that doesn't damage children more? I mean, for example, that's why we have problems with the charter schools. I mean, there's a lot of these charter schools that are made for alternative purposes beyond profit to indoctrinate children in things that are absolutely not true. And then they wonder why we have problems in the education system. So I was wondering if you had any other examples of things like this that you knew about where our tax dollars were being used, for purposes like that. I brought this up. This has happened. The story is they went back to Texas. Texas sets the standard, and these books actually came out of Texas, were approved and everything out of Texas. And Florida followed suit then, and then used the textbooks. And so that's my point on that.
Yes, I have a great deal to add to that. What was very disturbing was the fact that there is a group of legislators who personally owned or work for management companies that manage the charter schools, and
yes.
These legislators legislate on behalf and in favor of their charter schools that they are personally enriching themselves from, instead of protecting and promoting and maintaining our traditional public schools in the state of Florida. There is Manny Diaz. He is from Hialeah, and he works for Academica, the state's largest charter management company. He collects a salary of over $100,000 a year, and Academica has received many state contracts in regard to running charter schools in the state. We even have our very own Commissioner of Public Education, Richard Corcoran, who is calling all the shots for public education here in Florida. He was appointed by our governor, DeSantis, and his wife owns classical charter schools, classical academies that are endorsed and supported by Hillsdale College out of Michigan, a college that very openly discriminates against LGBTQ students, and